covers the NFL right now, says that the two sides are really, really close, and that's where we start here on a Tuesday. Time for Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. If you are Ezekiel Elliott and you are flying to Dallas, that should suggest that a deal is imminent. Not just, hey, we're still talking, we're getting closer and closer to it. No, imminent. You're going there with a purpose. That is to sign that contract, to get to the facility, to get ready to practice on Wednesday, to play in that game Sunday against the Giants. That is clearly the indication if he is traveling there, as ESPN has reported and other multiple outlets have as well. So the deal seemingly is going to get done. It could be done before this show ends at 3 o'clock Eastern, 12 noon on the West Coast. It could be done that fast. So my question to you is, whether you're a Cowboys fan, NFL fan in general, maybe a Cowboys hater out there, what will Zeke need to get in this deal in order for his holdout to be worth it? How much money does he need in order for everything that he went through, and maybe everything that some fans believe he put the organization through, although if you're a Zeke fan, you can say that Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones did the same thing to him. What would he have to get in order for the holdout to be worth it? How much money are we talking about? How much money up front? What is the structure of that deal? What needs to be in this contract for Zeke Elliott to have made the right decision in missing all the training camp, all the preseason games, but still be ready for week one? Right? Because a lot of people thought the money was Todd Gurley money. $45 million guaranteed when he signed his 5-year deal. Zeke still had 2 years left on his contract. Of course, he also had the opportunity to be franchised. So all that kind of stuff. And so he's like, yo, my production these first 3 years in the NFL has been to a certain level that I should be paid more than what I'm paid now. And I want to make sure I can get that security with more guaranteed money. That's clearly what he was trying to do with this holdout, right? I think everyone can see what he was trying to do based on his production the first 3 years, what that production means to the overall success of the Cowboys, and how that production rates across the entire NFL market. So if Todd Gurley's $45 million guaranteed, what is Ezekiel Elliott worth? If you are Zeke, in your mind, what are you worth compared to Todd Gurley? Of course, the other side of that is, for the Cowboys standpoint, what is he worth to us? Because we have, 52 other players we got to pay too, right? Including our young quarterback, who's due for a new deal. He needs money. Our young receiver, he needs money. And, we just had to sign pretty much our entire offensive line in the not-too-distant past, including La'el Collins getting new money, right? Now, the cool thing about that particular deal for La'el Collins, 5 years, how much money it was, it created $5.7 million of cap space, right? So that's another indication that the deal for Ezekiel Elliott is about to get done because of that money right there. That $5.7 million they were able to clear by doing the new deal with La'el Collins. So you have your offensive line intact. So now you do Zeke, you do Dak, and you do Mark Cooper, right, in that order. So if that's the case, what was all this worth? All this drama, all this controversy, all these missed workouts, all these missed preseason games, what was it actually worth to Ezekiel Elliott? And what was it worth to the Cowboys? Now, we won't really know until we find out if indeed the contract gets done in the next 24 hours or so, or just any time this week it gets done. But how it's structured will matter as well, and then how it affects everything else. So some of those questions we won't have. But what do you think Zeke Elliott needs in this contract in order for the whole thing to be worth it? Is it $45 million guaranteed? Is it Todd Gurley money? Is it more than Todd Gurley money? What if it's, $40 million guaranteed for a guy who had 2 years remaining on his contract and, has missed a few games for an assortment of reasons dealing with off-the-field issues, right? Because that has to be in play as well if you're the Cowboys. I know a lot of that had to do with the emotions of Jerry Jones probably being involved in this negotiation. You're not supposed to be emotional in negotiation, but people are human. It's hard not to. From Jerry Jones' standpoint, he's like, I've gone to bat for you multiple times, and now you're going to hold out when we're going to try to get you a deal done. I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. And Jerry, being who he is, trying to stay firm in that position. That's something that Ed Werder brought up on the Dan Le Batard show yesterday in terms of where Jerry Jones stands and what he's willing to do for that stance.
Jerry Jones is 76 years old. Mm-hmm. Is he really going to risk division games over money? You think he wouldn't, but this wouldn't be the first time that Jerry Jones has risked Super Bowls over a personnel move. But I think the Cowboys are pretty committed to the position that they're taking, and they believe what they're doing is fair. And I don't know how far Jerry's willing to move off of that, regardless of results.
They believe what they're offering is fair, okay? So if you were in a negotiation and you believe a certain money point, a number of years point, guaranteed money, what have you, if you believe it's fair, why are you going out of your way to answer some questions or give in to somebody and you think what they're asking for is unfair? Now, that may be the case here. Maybe that's why it's taken this long, to where they started for Ezekiel Elliott and his team and where the Cowboys started was so far apart, it took a long time to get somewhere in the middle to come to an agreement. So what is that number? What is that contract like in order for this to be worth it? Not just for the Cowboys, but also for Ezekiel Elliott. What is it worth for this whole thing to play out the way it did? Because I believe in so much of this drama that we've seen play out, and quite honestly, it's been all over Sports Talk Radio, it's been all over SportsCenter, it's been all over NFL Live. Ed Werder's on NFL Live right now talking about it. It's been all over the place. A lot of it typically is posturing, right? You can say one thing publicly to try to send a certain message or convey a certain sentiment, but then you could be doing something else privately in terms of trying to come to a resolution. And I believe there was a lot of posturing on the Cowboy standpoint. At least it felt that way from the things we heard from Jerry Jones, the things we heard from Stephen Jones. A couple weeks ago, they said they were not going to set the market for the running back position in the NFL. Even if maybe you have the best running back at that position, or the best player at that position, pardon me. Why wouldn't you set the market for it, right? So that was them putting some language out there in the public forum, sending a message to Ezekiel Elliott and his crew that, yo, we're not going to do that. We're the Cowboys. We don't have to do that, right? So that was the arrogance in that statement of we're not going to set the market because we're the Cowboys. We don't have to. But what if they do? What if you come back and you see Ezekiel Elliott with $47 million? Was it just posturing? Did they have this thing planned out the entire time with doing a certain thing in certain orders? Jalen Smith, La'el Collins, and now Ezekiel Elliott. Was that the plan from all along for Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones? And if he gets $45 million or $47 million, is it worth it for the Cowboys to have gone through all of that? Is it worth it for Ezekiel Elliott to have gone through all that? Probably yes, from Ezekiel Elliott's standpoint, but from the Cowboys standpoint, was it worth it? So again, I want to hear from you. 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. What will Zeke need to get in order for this holdout to be worth it? What will the Cowboys need to have paid him for it to be worth it? Now, here is something else you need to consider here. It's just how close this deal was to getting done. Not today, not last night potentially, but over the weekend. Again, Ed Werder on the Dan Le Batard show talking about the Cowboys were prepared to announce a contract until this happened.
There was a substantial amount of progress made in their conversations on Saturday night, and the Cowboys fully expected that on Sunday they were going to announce that they had assigned Elliott to an extension. And then when they heard from Rocky Arsenault for the first time yesterday, he took the discussion back to where it had been previous to those most recent conversations and made some demands that Cowboys thought they were past.
They thought they had a deal, and then all of a sudden, Zeke Elliott, his representation, come back with like, no, we still want this over here, right? So all this back and forth, and all of a sudden now we have this sense of urgency because A, the season is starting, and B, it's been going on way too long for it to stop being productive or potentially harm the team in some fashion or form going forward, right? So here's where we are right now, that Ezekiel Elliott is on his way to Dallas. You don't go there unless you're ready to sign a deal. You don't go there unless you are getting ready to play that first game. You may leave Cabo, you may come back to the United States, but you're not necessarily going to Dallas unless something is very, very imminent. So again, what needs to be in this deal for it to be worth it? For everyone involved, Ezekiel Elliott's standpoint, money-wise, the Cowboys, the whole deal. What needs to be in this deal for it to happen? 888-SAY-ESPN. That's 888-729-3776. Coming up A little bit later here in the Stephen A. Smith Show, Diana Rossini is going to join us, NFL reporter for us here at ESPN. She's been talking to a lot of people around the league about this whole Ezekiel Elliott situation because it has been a story that has captivated the entire league for a couple of reasons. One, it is the Cowboys, a team that maybe has Super Bowl potential, right? But it's also from the bigger picture of how business is done in the NFL these days. If you're a player watching this unfold, if you are a general manager watching this unfold, or if you're a coach, somewhere in between, you have to manage both sides of that dynamic. How is this thing going to play out, and how will it affect future teams, future negotiations, right? So we're going to get Diana's take on what this deal means and also how it affects other deals around the league, right? Because Melvin Gordon is still out there for the Chargers. But seemingly the Chargers' approach to Melvin Gordon is not quite the same as the Cowboys' approach to Ezekiel Elliott. We never felt as if this deal between Zeke and the Cowboys wouldn't get done. The only question was when. Would it be in time for him to play in the season opener, or would it linger into the season and maybe miss a couple of weeks? We always had the feeling that deal would get done. It would just be a matter of when and how much money Zeke would get, because everyone knows he deserves more money than he's getting paid. Still on his rookie deal, $3.8 million this year, $9 million for next season. But if you take a look at his stats, and you take a look at Todd Gurley's stats, highest paid running back in the league, $45 million guaranteed, you would see that they're pretty similar in terms of overall production. I mean, yards per attempt, 3 years for Ezekiel Elliott, 4.7. Yards per attempt, 4 years for Todd Gurley, 4.4. That's rushing. How about yards per touch, whether it's receiving, carrying the ball, what have you? 4 years for Todd Gurley, 5.2. 3 years for Ezekiel Elliott, 5.2. So the production from Ezekiel Elliott compared to Todd Gurley is right there. And if you look at the overall aspect of the individual offenses for those respective teams, Zeke for the Cowboys, Todd Gurley for the Rams, you could make the argument that Ezekiel Elliott is more valuable to the Cowboys than Todd Gurley is to the Rams. I mean, hell, Todd Gurley didn't even hardly play at the end of last year. They still made it all the way to the Super Bowl, right? So that bodes well for Ezekiel Elliott's negotiation stance, that he deserves Todd Gurley money based on his value, not just overall in the market and production, but his value to the team. How good is Dak Prescott because of Ezekiel Elliott? And is that something the Cowboys want to find out? Is that something the Cowboys want to go into this season to find out just how good Dak Prescott is without him? Now, granted, he's played several games. He's been suspended. Sure, fine. That happens. But you knew he was coming back. And you knew how it was going to affect everything else. But with a holdout, you don't know when someone is coming back. And that was the question lingering over this whole thing. When was he coming back? And at what cost to the Cowboys? Is he worth $45 million? Guaranteed money based on the production of other running backs in the league. And most notably, the highest paid running back in the league, Todd Gurley. Is Ezekiel Elliott worth that money? And if you're the Cowboys, how is he not worth it? How is he not worth it based on what you've seen the first 3 years? How is he not worth that money? But what if he doesn't get it? And you're Ezekiel Elliott, you hold out, and you don't get $45 million. Let's say you only get 40. Was it still worth it? Still more money than you were guaranteed to get over these last 2 years of your deal, right? It was more. Is more enough? Is just that much more enough if you're Ezekiel Elliott? 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. Michael Lee's filling in for Stephen A. today on the Stephen A. Smith Show. Also coming up a little bit later, we're going to talk to Mike Golick Jr. I want to get his take on this, but also talk some college football. But there's another issue that this whole holdout situation has made me think about. What is the value of training camp for established NFL stars? What's the value? Or even for preseason games, right? What's the value? Zeke missed everything. He missed all the training camp. He missed all the preseason games. He may just get a handful of workouts before he plays his first NFL game this year, this weekend, if he gets his deal done. Aaron Rodgers didn't play any preseason games for the Packers. Antonio Brown, what, a handful of practices at training camp between the helmet situation, his feet. And let's go back a couple years. How about Khalil Mack? He missed all of training camp last year, got his new deal, and balled out. Aaron Donald missed the last 2 training camps and preseason slate of games. He was there for this year because he had a new deal last year. But the 2 years previous, he wasn't in training camp. He didn't do OTAs. He didn't do any of that stuff. He didn't do preseason games. And what did he do when he got back? He balled out. So all the time we hear these coaches and GMs talk about we need our guys back here because the da-da-da-da. Do they really? Does it really matter? If Ezekiel Elliott comes out and has like 2 practices and goes for 80 to 100 yards against the Giants on Sunday, why would anybody show up? What is the value of training camp these days? Remember Michael Strahan several years ago? He skipped training camp, preseason games because he didn't want to play them because he was older in his career and just didn't want all the hassle. Shows up and balls out. We've seen guys do this repeatedly through the years. So what is the value of training camp? Again, going back to the negotiation with Ezekiel Elliott and the Cowboys, I called it posturing, is all this talk about the value of training camp for established NFL stars. We're talking about established guys, Pro Bowl guys. Is it overrated? Is it even necessary? People have been clamoring to get rid of preseason games or at least maybe cut them in half. Based on these guys playing well without going through those preseason games or even training camp workouts, why do we need them besides money? Why do we need them for the owners besides money? Now, certain guys, sure. Middle of the pack guys trying to make the roster, all those things are probably invaluable to them. But do you think Tom Brady needs preseason games? Hell, does Jared Goff need preseason games? Carson Wentz, Todd Gurley, Michael Thomas, Antonio Brown, Khalil Mack, Aaron Donald. Those guys need preseason games? Do they need full training camps? Because we're about to see Ezekiel Elliott miss all that and see what happens in his first game. We saw it last year with Khalil Mack. We saw it last year with Aaron Donald. We've seen it in years past. We've seen it with quarterbacks. We've seen it with running backs. We've seen it with receivers. We've seen it with linemen. We've seen it with just about everybody. If Aaron Rodgers balls out in his first regular season game, what would be the value of preseason games? I mean, he's got a new coach and he didn't play in a preseason game. New coach, not one preseason game for Aaron Rodgers. Is it worth it? Or is it just a way of controlling players, coaches, what have you? Is it all about control? Some guys need it, some guys don't. Well, who doesn't? And where's that line established? Because Ezekiel Elliott wasn't there. Aaron Rodgers didn't play any preseason games. Antonio Brown, for the most part, wasn't there. He was there and he wasn't, but when he was there, he was a headache for a lot of people involved. What is the value of training camp these days in the NFL? Preseason games. What's the real value for these guys? Just a waste? And that's why so many people have been paying attention to this particular situation with the Cowboys, Ezekiel Elliott. If you're a younger player, if you're a younger established running back, and you're trying to stay in the league as long as possible because that is the one position that usually has the shortest shelf life because of what happens. The pounding that you take over the course of a game. So to limit that, no training camp, no preseason games, will that give you an extra year on your career? Maybe a year and a half, 2 years. Will that work? Don't know. One way to find out, though, see how this works for Ezekiel Elliott. If he misses this entire training camp, we've seen it with Le'Veon Bell before. He's done it. Worked out fine. The way he finished the season that year, got off to a slow start, but then balled out at the end of the year. Maybe that's the move for running backs. If they're not going to pay them the way they want to be paid, maybe they skip training camps, they skip preseason games to try to get a